One evening, when everything around me had already quieted down and only the noise of my own thoughts remained, I sat out on the terrace and looked up at the sky. The moon hovered there motionless, as if it were watching me. It might sound strange, but somehow I've always had this feeling that the moon isn't just a celestial body. In the silence, those thoughts started to grow louder, the ones that ask, what if everything we've been taught is only a fragment of the truth? These what-if questions have practically become a hobby of mine. I love them, because they set me free. And as I sat there, watching the lights of people in the distance, I thought about how short a time we've been here, and how little we actually understand of what surrounds us. Because despite science, despite technology, despite centuries of progress, we still know nothing for certain. We have no tool that allows us to look back into the past. All we have is the present, and assumptions. But what if reality is something entirely different? What if, for example, millions of years ago, long before we humans were even part of the plan, an alien civilization arrived here, drawn by Earth's resources and life-friendly conditions, but something just wasn't quite right for them. And then came the moon. Maybe it didn't emerge out of nowhere, but arrived intentionally, a massive artificial structure brought here to change the conditions of Earth. As if someone had adjusted a giant control knob tweaking fine-tuning, and we just assume this is natural. But I'll talk more about that in detail later. Because what if, once they had used up everything the planet had to offer, they simply moved on, left the moon behind like a worn-out tool? I know what we learn in school is sacred and untouchable for many. But sometimes, it's worth recognizing that the knowledge we receive in school often only shows us a single slice of possibility. Of course, I also think it's entirely possible that the moon formed naturally. But what if it didn't? What if Earth's history isn't a peaceful tale of development, but rather the background story of a cosmic war? And what if we humans are merely accidental byproducts of whatever once happened here? It's just been so long ago, there's no trace of it left. In this video, I'm going to explore the idea that the moon didn't form naturally, but is in fact a massive artificial object, perhaps a spaceship brought here by someone long ago, or a probe that's still in use even today, and we simply have no idea about it. Let's begin with the fact that, according to current scientific understanding, there are multiple theories about how the moon might have formed. And which one we learned in school largely depends on when and where we went to school, because even scientists don't fully agree on this. Every theory has arguments for and against it, so in the end, people tend to side with the one they personally find more appealing. From that perspective, the illusion that we can know for certain how the moon originated already starts to fall apart. Still, for the sake of clarity, let's go through the most popular scientific explanations. The first theory suggests that the moon formed from the same ancient cosmic dust as Earth itself. That would be neat and logical if it weren't for the presence of materials on the moon that haven't yet been identified on Earth. The second popular theory suggests that the moon was once part of the Earth. This idea branches into two directions. One version says that the Earth spun so fast that centrifugal force tore a piece off the Earth. The other version claims that a massive asteroid collided with Earth, and the moon formed from the debris of that impact. At first glance, both of these sound quite logical, but there's an interesting detail that might make you pause and think. The Earth's density is 5.5, while the moon's is only 3.3. For comparison, Mercury, the planet closest to the Sun, has a density of 5.3, almost the same as Earth's. This difference is thought-provoking. The third theory suggests that the moon was once a rogue celestial body, drifting through the solar system for millions of years, until Earth's gravity captured it and placed it into orbit. You see, the moon is unusually large, especially for something that's considered just a moon. Many argue that a planet as small as Earth simply shouldn't be able to have such a massive satellite. Just look at this image. At the top is Earth, next to it the moon, and below that Europa, one of Jupiter's moons. They're almost the same size, but Europa doesn't orbit a planet the size of Earth, it orbits Jupiter, which is vastly larger in both mass and volume. What's truly strange is that Jupiter and Earth have almost identically sized moons. In fact, to be precise, our moon is actually a bit larger than Jupiter's moon Europa. But let's keep going with this string of coincidences. The moon is exactly 400 times smaller than the sun, yet it just so happens to be 400 times closer to Earth. And if that weren't enough, the moon takes 27.32 days to rotate once on its axis. And wouldn't you know it, it also takes exactly 27.32 days to orbit the Earth, down to the 100th of a day. That's why we always see the same face of the moon. And this too is just coincidence? But from the moon, it's different. From there, Earth is visible from all directions. And there's another curious oddity. The moon's orbit around Earth is nearly a perfect circle. That's especially surprising because the moon's center of mass does not match its geometric center. It's actually shifted slightly toward Earth. And here's the kicker. On the far side of the moon, the one we never see, there's a bulge. And that bulge just so happens to perfectly balance out the mass discrepancy. And we haven't even mentioned the craters yet. There's something particularly strange about the pattern of craters on the moon's surface. Regardless of diameter, whether several kilometers wide or just a few hundred meters, the depth is almost always the same. Even when massive asteroids slammed into the surface, the resulting craters aren't significantly deeper than those created by much smaller impacts. Take the largest crater on the moon, for example. It spans 2,500 kilometers in width, but it's only 13 kilometers deep. Some researchers argue that if such an enormous object had really struck the moon, the impact should have shattered it entirely. And here's what's truly curious. We don't even know exactly how that crater formed. There are theories suggesting it wasn't originally that size at all, that the force of the impact caused it to spread out, like a plate that got flattened. And if you look closely, many of the moon's craters really do resemble plates of various diameters, always with the same depth. And while we're on the topic of craters, let's take a look at their distribution. On the side we can see from Earth, scientists have counted approximately 300,000 craters so far. But on the far side, the one we can never observe with the naked eye, only through images and probes, there are barely 30,000 craters, just a tenth as many. That alone is strange. And what's even stranger is that many of those craters on the far side weren't even formed by external impacts, yet there's no evidence of volcanic activity ever having occurred on the moon. Rock samples from the moon have also revealed that the moon is several billion years older than Earth itself. In fact, some scientists claim it's even older than the solar system. If that's true, it could mean that the moon didn't originate from here at all, but came from another star system entirely. And now, back to that massive crater. Beneath the 2,500-kilometer-wide impact site, probes detected something that simply doesn't belong there. A massive metallic object. Some believe it can't be of natural origin. In fact, many suggest it's an artificial structure, and perhaps it's no accident that it's right where it is. Soviet academics even went further with their theory. They proposed that the moon is actually a gigantic spacecraft, an artificial object made up of two main components, an inner structural core and an outer, impenetrable metallic shell. The purpose of the outer layer? To hide the moon's true function, to make it appear as just an innocent celestial body from the outside. But in reality, this shell protects the interior from space debris, meteorites, and impacts. And what could be inside? They didn't rule out the possibility that the moon might be an observation station, or some kind of space base, perhaps even a cosmic gas station for alien spacecraft. An interesting parallel. Before Armstrong even set foot on the lunar surface, NASA released a report. I believe that document was partly intended to rally public support for the moon landing program, because, let's be honest, everyone wanted to know what was really going on up there. This is the so-called R-275 report, published in 1968. It compiles all known lunar anomalies observed up until that time. And for those who are curious, the report is publicly available and contains over 600 documented sightings between 1540 and 1967. For instance, in 1671, Gian Cassini, yes, that Cassini, saw a white cloud hovering over the moon's surface. Sir Frederick William Herschel, who later discovered Uranus, observed moving lights on the moon. In 1959, something continually obscured a certain area, preventing any clear photographs from being taken. In 1967, Canadian astronomers reported a large violet-colored cloud floating along the moon's edge precisely at the site where NASA would later direct its first mission. And these are just a few examples among hundreds. The majority of the reports describe strange lights, reddish flashes, bluish glows, orange streaks of light, some of which remained visible for hours. In 1953, an amateur astronomer observed something unusual on the moon through a small telescope, a bridge-like structure on the western rim of the Mercurius crater. At first, no one paid much attention to it until Percy Wilkins, one of the most respected lunar researchers of the time, publicly admitted that he too could see something in the image. Wilkins didn't claim it was an artificial structure, but he did confess he couldn't provide a natural explanation for the feature that looked suspiciously like a bridge. And now, hold on. During the Apollo 11 mission, the very first moon landing, the Americans didn't just leave behind a flag and equipment. They also left a gold-plated olive branch and an engraved message that read, "Here men from the planet Earth first set foot upon the moon, July 1969 AD. We came in peace for all mankind." And if that weren't enough, they also left a silicon disk bearing messages from 4 U.S. presidents and the leaders of 73 other nations. And this is where the question naturally arises. Who were these messages really meant for? For the moon? For the neighbors? For the only celestial body we can see in detail with the naked eye? Personally, I've always found this gesture a little strange. It's one thing to send a message across light years via satellite or space probe just in case someone out there might find it one day. But to leave such messages on the moon, a place we can sometimes see clearly without even a telescope. Why there, of all places? What was that internal thought, that deep-seated feeling, that made them believe whoever is up there might need to hear it? Then, of course, there's that point of view, which I find a bit too optimistic that aliens could reach the moon, but somehow not make it to Earth. As if the peak of their technology were to sit up there, quietly listening to our messages, while we, down here in the next room, are busy tearing our own planet apart. Of course, these messages only seem strange if they weren't actually intended for those who might be living on the moon. Even before the Apollo missions, NASA sent several probes close to the moon to capture as many images of the surface as possible. On one of these images, according to many observers, there appears to be an alien structure, simply referred to as the tower. In fact, another photo shows a similar tower-like shape. Based on moon photographs and their analysis, George Leonard wrote a book titled "Somebody Else is on the Moon." In it, he argues, just as the title suggests, that aliens may be present on the moon. For example, one photo shows tracks that, in his opinion, weren't created by humans, but by some kind of alien activity. During NASA's Clementine program, nearly 2 million images were taken of the moon, most of them still publicly available. However, there were a few photos where clear signs of editing could be seen. Several of these images later disappeared without a trace. According to NASA, those were just corrupted files, where the system automatically filled in the missing pixels, which is why they looked odd. Later, the data somehow always arrived, and the images were restored. But what was originally there? Well, who knows? The Clementine probe, for example, captured an image of the moon's southern hemisphere showing a 170-kilometer-long, perfectly rectangular shape. And that's just one of many. Another photo, taken in 1966 by an American probe and others later by Chinese spacecraft, caused quite a stir. At first glance, it looks completely empty. Maybe it's overexposed, maybe it's just faulty. But if you tweak the brightness and contrast a little, well, a distinctly pyramid-like shape begins to emerge on the moon's surface. And of course, we can't ignore the light phenomena that amateur astronomers observe on the moon almost monthly. And yes, you probably won't be surprised to hear that even in the moon version of Google Earth, there are several areas where, well, how should I put it? It looks like humanoid figures are walking across the surface. And if all that weren't enough, one of NASA's probes discovered water molecules as far back as 1994, deep inside one of the moon's craters, something we know to be one of the key requirements for life. What's more, The moon's movement aligns almost perfectly with the same solar path as Earth's, which, according to some researchers, means that traces of life could have developed in certain areas. And if that still isn't enough, here's another staggering discovery. Iron ore was found on the surface, specifically a type that, on Earth, can only form in the presence of both water and oxygen. And before anyone rushes to judgment, maybe we should just pause for a moment and ask ourselves, what is it that we actually believe in? Because no matter how convincing it all sounds, science even today is largely built on assumptions. And which theory someone chooses to believe in, well, often it just comes down to which version they find most appealing. I'm only saying that as a side note. But maybe, just maybe, that's the most important sentence in this entire video. Many people refer to solar eclipses as some kind of unique, miraculous phenomenon. But in reality, it's not just Earth's privilege. Jupiter, for example, has a moon roughly the same size as ours. And since the sun appears much smaller from out there, eclipses can also occur on Jupiter. The difference is simply that here on Earth, the sizes and distances line up in a way that feels almost too perfect. And then there's that famous piece of metal found at the top of the moon's mantle, which, if all is correct, shouldn't even be there. According to scientists, it should theoretically be buried deep inside the moon. But since it's not, one official explanation suggests it might be the core of an asteroid that melted upon impact and spread across the surface. George Leonard's book, Somebody Else is on the Moon, I flipped through it, though I admit I didn't read every page. But for instance, the image he calls evidence didn't seem like anything special to me. Leonard, however, saw it as undeniable proof of alien presence. There's also another NASA photo often cited as proof of lunar pyramids. But when you look at the context in which the photo was taken, it becomes clear that the structure is really just a shadow or possibly a part of the lunar rover. Then there's the commonly repeated claim that the moon rang like a bell when the lunar module crashed into it. But we know sound doesn't travel in a vacuum. So these weren't audible sounds, it was measured seismic vibrations. Even so, it still baffles me that a 2-ton lunar module could trigger a quake of that magnitude. The official explanation is that the moon's surface is much harder than Earth's. There's no water to absorb the shock waves, and its material is denser and more brittle. In other words, the surface acts like a kind of iron shell, which is why the tremor lasted so long. Still, no measurement has ever confirmed that the entire interior of the moon is hollow. That said, more and more researchers now acknowledge the possibility that there could be massive cavities inside the moon, possibly even cave systems. Today, this is no longer ruled out. And while we're on the topic of light phenomena, for a long time they puzzled scientists too. But today, many believe the moon isn't as dead as we once thought. It's possible that volcanic processes are still taking place deep below the surface. These could release gases that escape through cracks, sometimes appearing as simple gas clouds, other times as blue, violet, or other strange glowing effects. Curiously, NASA has never publicly denied the moon as spacecraft theory. Most likely because they don't engage with it at all, because entering that debate would only risk making them look foolish. After all, the moon is their workplace, and they're the ones who feel they know it better than anyone else. And maybe that's exactly why they stay silent, because they don't want to seem unserious, and don't want to risk legitimizing a layperson's theory by responding to it. As for the moon's perfect orbit, yes, it's nearly circular. But the word nearly is key here. Jupiter's moon Ganymede, for example, follows a perfectly circular orbit with 50 times greater precision than our moon. So when you compare the two, our moon's near perfection doesn't seem all that extraordinary. And I don't want to go over every coincidence again, the ones I mentioned earlier in the video, but it's worth adding that, according to some sources, these alignments are mathematically possible. Just like winning the lottery is possible in theory. It's just that reality plays by different rules. In real life, the odds speak for themselves. And with all this, I'm not trying to argue against the artificial moon theory. I just think we shouldn't forget that the moon didn't have just a day or two to win the lottery, it had millions of years. And if we really think about how much time chance had to work its way into alignment, then all of this starts to seem a bit less strange. After all, Even the emergence of life itself required an unimaginable number of coincidences. Just as Earth was lucky to have the Moon, we're also incredibly lucky to have Earth. You could say that one coincidence gave birth to many others. A lot of people ask, if there's really nothing on the Moon, then why haven't we gone back? Were we scared, or did we secretly make a deal with whoever might be up there to never bother them again? But I think the answer is much simpler and much more human. It's called money. The truth is, we've already learned just about everything we can from the Moon. The remaining research simply doesn't justify the cost. It's a logical and understandable decision if you look at it from a priority standpoint. We have plenty of other problems here on Earth that are far more worthy of our time and investment. And think about it. If it hadn't been for the Cold War, if there hadn't been a race with the Soviets, NASA probably never would have launched the Apollo missions at all. Armstrong probably wouldn't have become the first man on the Moon. Sometimes, listening to scientific explanations, I get the feeling that even the laws of physics themselves didn't expect things to happen the way they did. But since they did happen, we try to explain them sometimes after the fact, and sometimes with a bit of force. Maybe the fault is mine. Maybe I just don't always understand these theories when they're wrapped in such complex language. But if these ideas are really meant for the layperson, then they should be communicated in a way that everyone can actually understand. And as for this topic, I know I didn't say everything. I didn't want to pull out every tiny splinter and analyze it in isolation, because if I did that, maybe the video would never end. It would be like trying to explain why the Moon kept shaking for so long by saying there's no water to dampen the vibrations. But then again, Earth has plenty of water, and sometimes our earthquakes last just as long. So we could go back and forth with arguments forever, but at some point we have to throw in the towel. And this is me doing just that. And finally, this really is the end of my reflection. I don't know how others feel, but I do believe we're not alone. I believe they've already been here, because this planet, our planet, is unbelievably favorable, hospitable, and a beautiful place. If someone out there, on the other side of the universe, were searching for the possibility of life, they would probably find their way here, sooner or later. And if they've ever been here, then I'm absolutely certain they've been to the Moon as well, because the Moon is like an open notebook. Once you step on it, your footprint stays. Maybe there really is something up there we just can't see yet. But someone, somewhere else, already knows the answer. Maybe even from the top of the pyramid. At least, that's what I think. Thank you for listening to my thoughts and for coming along with me on this little journey. Have a beautiful day. Goodbye.